Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. If we both sound a bit more chuckly than two men whose teams were outplayed yesterday should do, that's because I'm so intrigued as to why the fours come back in the countdown. And yes. Kieran saw my face and I saw his face, and I went the fours back.
It was my second least favourite Thunderbird as well, because that was the one which went underwater. So it was hardly ever used, was it?
So your second least favourite? Yeah, I know. I used to feel sorry for the poor sod who he was barely ever getting to go down the chute, was he? Yeah. I didn't like Thunderbird 1. I found him a bit cocky, the bloke who flew Thunderbird 1. He obviously... Thunderbird 2 was the best one.
Yeah, the Baroness named her son after the pilot of Thunderbird 1.
I just for a moment was praying that you said the Baroness named her son Thunderbird 1. So what was he? Alan? Was he Alan?
He was Scott.
Oh, Scott.
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah. Huge Thunderbirds fan, the Baroness.
What happened to naming your child after a saint, like the rest of us? the rest of us Catholics, I should point out before we get tweets. Yeah, the best thing about Thunderbirds still is when they would cut to a real human hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Normally smoking.
Yeah. And also the fact they celebrated Parker, who was a villain. He'd been inside. He'd done time. And we were supposed
rehabilitation, Kevin. Yeah, we've got to believe in it.
Yeah. The BAFTA's gone again, isn't it?
Yes.
It's literally 2 minutes in. There's some really big news stories going on in the world of football finance, says BAFTA, but we didn't get to hear them. Well, they won't today because it's questions day, Kieran. We got some good questions. We're hoping to have some Everton news this week. The war drums are indicating that the result might be announced. That the outcome of the commission might be announced this week, Kieran. We understand, so We'll keep an eye on that. Right. Now, our first question, Kieran, comes from Helen Summers. Hello, Helen. Thank you for the question. And the question is this. Last season, Reading announced that their women's team were going back to part-time after they were relegated to the Championship. What did this mean for players who were in contract but couldn't afford to be part-time players? It's not like they were paid millions to begin with. And what are the rules for the Championship they have to adhere to stay in the league? Now, I'm going to suggest, Kieran, that I think at some levels of football, and we have discussed this, there are players who would be perfectly happy not being full-time because they can actually make more money out of having a job and playing football part-time.
That's absolutely correct, yes. In the case of Reading, it's been a busy morning, it has to be said, at Company's House.
Oh, okay. Already? It's only 10 past 10.
I went and downloaded the accounts for Reading's women's team, and they were losing around about 25 grand a week in the WSL itself before they were relegated. And that is not uncommon as far as the women's game is concerned. It's still a start-up business, so you do anticipate making losses under those circumstances. As far as the players were concerned, I would suspect the vast majority of players were on one-year contracts. So those contracts would have expired at the 30th of June, or rather at the end of the season. And then those contracts would either be renewed on a full-time basis or the players would seek to go to other clubs and so on. So it is a precarious industry. It's only the sort of the elite clubs that are in a position to offer the longer-term contracts. So as far as any existing contracts, those players that were on 2-year contracts, the club would have to honour them. It can't just walk away and says that we've made a global decision that we're going to go part-time. It would effectively had to phase in the transition from full-time to part-time and wait for those players who had full-time contracts for those contracts to expire and so on. So therefore, the players would not have been disadvantaged. The club, and there's a separate issue, is Reading weren't very good at paying wages, full stop. And that has been an ongoing challenge, as we're fully aware. As far as all of the employees of the football club are concerned. But Helen's absolutely right. The average salary in the WSL was around about £30,000 a year. And I say that's an average, and that's including the fact that you've got the likes of Chelsea and Manchester City and Manchester United all paying substantially above their average. So some players would have been on substantially less than that. So therefore, I suspect going part-time, as you sort of hinted, could be similar to what we see in respect of those players in the National League who train 2 or 3 times a week and also have alternative forms of employment. That was historically the case, I think, as far as women's football was concerned, until it did turn fully professional. Remember that the WSL itself, as an entity, is still relatively new. So many players have come from a part-time basis to establish themselves as full-time, and now in the Championship, the resources aren't there. The clubs in the Championship get a quarter of the overall value of the TV deal. And also there is a wage cap operating in the women's game of you can't spend more than 40% of your revenue on player wages. And there's not a lot of money coming into the second tier of English women's football. So all of those are pretty big constraints.
That average wage of 30,000, Kieran, as you indicate, we know that Man City, Arsenal and Chelsea are paying their women's teams considerably more than £30,000 a week, which means that the rest of the players in the WSL are not getting much money at all. I mean, I think that would come as a surprise to learn how little players in the top flight of women's football are getting outside the big clubs, Kieran.
It is, and remember we had Tina on the show a few weeks ago, who's Tina's Mary sort of commercial advisor, and what we are seeing in the women's game is that at the elite level, the players become brands in themselves due to their social media presence, due to the fact that they're willing to engage with fans to a greater extent in the men's game. That's not necessarily a criticism of players in the men's game, because I know Premier League footballers, you know Premier League footballers and players in the EFL, and they've done things in good faith and they've been taken advantage of, such as signing a shirt for somebody and standing next to somebody sitting the shirt. And then what you do is 24 hours later, you see that shirt's up on eBay and somebody's making 500 quid, a grand out of it and so on. So I think players have felt that their decency has been taken advantage of for other people to be opportunistic. That's not tended to be the case in the women's game, but many of the women's players are earning more money from commercial activities and sponsorship than they are necessarily in terms of their salary. But that just refers to a very small element within the playing staff who have made a name for themselves, as we've seen, Spotty and the Jungle Show and whatever it is. I don't watch reality TV.
I think we should point out, Kieran, that when you say Spotty, you mean Sports Personality of the Year.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Just so people wondering why out of the blue you just went Spotty.
Yeah. So I'm a celebrity, isn't it? So I don't watch that type of stuff. So I'm a bit out of the loop.
Kieran, the amount of TV appearances you're doing recently, you could be on I'm a Celebrity. Imagine that. That would be a great episode of I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here. You just on the hammock, worrying about spreadsheets that you're missing.
Yes.
Well, various people from Love Island go, who's that bloke muttering about amortisation? Talking of Man City, Kieran, reminds me, I did promise I don't do this sort of thing often because it makes me sound like Gary Davis on Radio 2. So I don't normally agree to shout-outs, but a Man City fan called Lloydie, who's proudly told us he was 64 and looking forward to getting his old age pension Man City ticket reduced next season. He found his way into the Paulson's Arms yesterday with a couple of other Man City fans. They were very welcome. They deliberately sought out the Paulson's Arms because they'd heard us mention it on the pod. And Lloydie's doing a half marathon today, and he's doing a marathon next week. So he kept it down to just the 3 pints, which
Professional.
we got him a round of applause from all the Palace fans in the port himself. So good luck, Lloyd. I believe, Kieran, it's the Brighton Marathon that he's doing next week.
It's today.
I was out today. So he's doing the Brighton Marathon today then. So
yeah.
Which gave us a happy 10 minutes speculating what the Brighton Marathon would consist of. So we reckoned
I've done the Brighton Marathon myself.
Well, we reckoned it would be 10 yards of ale and as many plates of couscous as you could get down. That would be the real Brighton Marathon. Have you done the Brighton? What was your time in the Brighton Marathon, Kieran?
Oh, it wasn't good. It was 4:50.
Well, I'm going to say to you what I say to all the other people who run marathons, Kieran. Apparently, walking one is much harder than running one. This is what we say. As somebody who walks one every year, apparently, although as a physiotherapist friend said to me, so when you're knackered, then when you're halfway around your marathon walk, you relax by breaking into a run. Is that right? Well, if you put it anyway,
it was my first ever marathon. It was an experience and a half. I trained reasonably well for it, but having never run a marathon before, I'd never experienced this thing that they call the wall. And you tend to be a bit dismissive. And I'd run practice runs of 20, 21 miles, and that was no problem. And I was doing fine. And then when it did hit me, I know the Baroness saw me about 4 or 5 miles to go, and she was waving to me. I did not, for the last 2 or 3 miles, I don't know how or what I was doing. I remember, as you know, I'm quite puritanical. I've never smoked. I've never taken drugs. I've never drunk alcohol or anything like that. But when I was overtaken by a life-size Scooby-Doo, for somebody dressed in costume, I honestly thought I was on LSD or something. It was great. I mean, the amount of support you get from the crowds and so on, absolutely amazing. And I was on for a good time, but then after last 5 miles were horrendous.
Funnily enough, on last year's Marathon March, we hit the wall just outside the Dulwich Woodhouse pub, 18 miles in, which was amazing coincidence. What was the charity? What charity were you running for? Company's House? Did you have Company's House emblazoned on your T-shirt?
No, I was running for the Alzheimer's Society because Gail's mum, she had dementia, and having seen the level of support that organisation gives, not just to people who are going through it, but also the people who have to support them. It was the least I could do.
And also, Kieran, speaking of football shirts, as you were, if you remember, we had a very good interview with John Blair recently, who trades and collects classic vintage football shirts, and who predicted that the Inter Milan shirt with the Paramount Plus sponsors would be a collectible of the future. And this question, Kieran, is about just that thing. And the question comes from Colm Hand. And Colm says, Inter Milan signed a new sponsorship deal with Paramount Plus after their deal with Crypto Bros Digital Bits strangely fell through last season. Having gone a few months with no sponsor, did that new deal, which covered a Champions League final, leave them financially better off overall, given that Digital Bits failed to fulfil their payment obligations? Also, is there anything stopping other clubs potentially ending sponsorship deals during a season should a better offer come along, or should they appear in a major final and seek an enhanced deal?
Right, there's a lot to unpack there. As far as the deal with Digital Bits was concerned, it was worth around about €24 million a year. So very, very significant. But Digital Bits failed to make payments throughout the whole of the 22-23 season. So that left Inter with, they felt, with no alternative but to effectively take away the rights. Paramount Plus came in for the final game of the season, I think it was, against Torino, and also for the Champions League final. Now, under UEFA rules, you are not allowed to strike alternative sponsorship deals for the Champions League final. Inter appealed, and UEFA said, well, under these very specific extenuating circumstances, it was prepared to do this because it acknowledged that Inter had acted in good faith as far as signing the original deal with Digital Bits, and that Digital Bits, as a bunch, and it's unusual for a crypto company to fail to honour its obligations.
Ain't it just?
Absolutely. Yeah. But therefore, they agreed, and it was a €4 million deal. And on the back of that, I think Paramount Plus were pleased with the amount of attention that it brought to them, because that became a story in its own right. Not just the fact that they were coming to the rescue to an element. What they've therefore decided to do is that for 23-24, Paramount Plus are the official back of shirt sponsor. Now, it's always intrigued me why Premier League clubs haven't gone down this route, because if you take a look at rugby league and you take a look at, I think, Aussie rules and so on, practically every part of the shirt is covered in sponsorship. Now, it could be that the Premier League clubs have done their own sums, and they reckon that just having one sponsor, and it's so prominent, means that the amount of money that single sponsor is prepared to pay actually outweighs the thoughts of having lots of sponsors elsewhere. But it is something which, given the decision to pull out of having gambling companies as sponsors from 2026 in effect, is this something which could resurrect itself? Is this something which UEFA itself might be considering in terms of its relationship with clubs going forward? Because we know the clubs are desperate to earn money. So there's that. As far as Column's question with regards to effectively cancelling an existing deal, in the world of contracts, everything's up for grabs. So I had something bugging me, which I vaguely remembered-ish. So I went on to Chelsea's accounts on Companies House. And in their 2016 accounts, they paid £67 million compensation to Adidas to break the contract. Adidas had a long-term contract to manufacture Chelsea's kit, and Chelsea said, here's 67 million quid if you allow us to break that contract 3 or 4 years early and sign up with Nike. So if it can be done in respect of manufacturing deals, it certainly can be done in respect of front of shirt deals. It's simply a case of show me the money.
Funny enough, the issue of back of shirt sponsoring came up in I can't remember what the actual Q&A. I was doing some sort of Q&A at Selhurst Park, and the subject of French football shirts came up, because French kits, they have sponsorship on the shorts and all sorts, don't they? And the commercial manager at the time said that he thought it was partly to do with the fact that you would get such little money for the back of shirt sponsorship compared to the front of shirts, because you very rarely get a lingering close-up of the back of a shirt. But also he said they thought it might affect the amount of people having their names printed on the back of their shirt, because either it gives you less space, or if you've got Grandad, as so many people have, hilariously, you've got Grandad 69 on the back of their shirt. If that's being obscured by a local insurance broker, they're probably less likely to do so. I don't know if we've ever discussed this, Kieran, but did Inter ever actually try to sue Digital Bits for the money that went unpaid? Do we know?
I've not seen anything, and I do sort of keep an eye on these things. They've probably taken legal advice and realised that, given that Digital Bits would probably only have offered to pay them in crypto, it's not worth pursuing.
Right, fair point. You'll get angry tweets from the crypto brigade, Kieran.
I know.
All with KL912684 as their really handy Twitter handle, or X handle, whatever it's called these days. Sam Hunt has our next question, Kieran, and it's an interesting one. Sam says, will the expulsion of London Irish have had an impact on Brentford? They were tenants at Brentford Stadium since it opened. So what income will Brentford be missing out on? Is a tenant required to make the stadium financially viable, or are they expected to cope just fine without one?
I think this is very much incremental money as far as Brentford were concerned. Although, when the deal would initially been signed, Brentford would have been a championship club, and they would have been looking at all elements of revenue streams. I went on to London Irish's accounts. Now, originally they were playing at Reading's ground, so they were playing at the Majdad, and then they switched to Brentford. Now, from what I can make out, they were paying £135,000 a year in rent. For the context of Premier League football club, that's 0.1%. There's a separate issue in the sense that what would happen in terms of catering revenue and so on, how would that be split between the landlord, which would have been Brentford Football Club, and the tenant in the shape of London Irish. And the one season that they did play there before they went bust was a COVID season. So trying to work out the impact that would have had in terms of additional attendances isn't possible to gauge. This is all ignoring the fact that I'm sure the groundsman wasn't consulted, or the groundsman, if he was consulted, would have rolled their eyes and said, "Not on my pitch, pal."
Well, this is why
we know how protected they are.
This is why we know he wasn't consulted, Kieran, because if he had been consulted, it wouldn't have happened, would it?
That's right.
Let's face it. I do find it a little bit distracting, I have to say, when you watch Bristol City. There's a Bristol City game on Sky. I find the rugby markings quite distracting, I have to say, still. I'm surprised that Brentford would agree. I mean, that's, like you say, £135,000 a season, Kieran, is nothing, really, compared to the inconvenience it would cause, I would have thought, as well.
Yes. I would imagine it would have been a decision which would have been discussed at length, but I think London Irish, or certainly some of the London rugby-based clubs, have played at Vicarage Road, they've played at Loftus Road, and so on. So it in itself is not unusual, but there is a downside, and I think whenever I watch a bit of ITV4, which, as you know, as I'm not watching reality shows, and you've got the Big Match Revisited, and you compare the pitches in the 70s and 80s to what we have today, because it's been an incremental thing, I don't think we appreciate just how brilliant the pitches are in terms of smoothness, the fact that you've got grass throughout the whole of the season and so on, in which to play a game which is now played on the floor. And again, comparing to those matches, the amount of time the ball used to spend in the air compared to what we see today was far greater.
Yeah, I watched a Big Match Revisited the other night, Kieran, because it was Palace Stoke from 1972, and there was some grass. You could spot a bit of grass in the corner. The most exciting bit was because Ed was half watching it with me. He just went, the goalkeeper's picked the ball up. What's he doing? He's just passed it back. But it's the ball that was the thing. I mean, whatever the opposite of multi-ball system is, that's what we had back in those days, because it wasn't. It was just one ball, but that ball would see the whole season's action. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Harry France. Strong name, Harry France. And I believe it's one of the things Henry V called himself. That's a little joke there for Shakespearean scholars. I'm going to see Henry IV Part 1 and 2 on Tuesday to see Ian McKellen. I can't wait. But Harry France, strong name, says, with the huge investment announced into the Saudi leagues, could we see a potential Saudi-led club tournament featuring the classic European Super League teams in order to increase the marketability of these leagues? Is there anything in FA or other countries' football bodies' law prohibiting taking part in such tournaments whilst also playing in UEFA or domestic competitions? It's a very interesting question, this one, Kieran, because it could be a way around the European Super League teams' problems, couldn't it? They just go, well, we're having it, but it's a Saudi tournament, so it's just a little friendly knockabout that they're paying us £1 million a game for.
I think it'd be more than £1 million a game as well.
Oh, right, really?
I think that. I think this is spot on from Harry, and it's a case of when rather than if such tournaments take place, because we are used to Spurs going to Asia, Manchester United going to America, Liverpool going to Singapore, and around the world. There's even talk, because there's a bit of Matoma mania at Brighton, of Brighton doing a pre-season tour of Japan and so on. So these activities are significant. If you take a look at Manchester United's accounts, Manchester United reckon they make £15 million a year from doing a bit of pre-season. Now, that's good for local sponsors. The matches will sell out. Certainly, when I went to Philadelphia last year to see the Premier League Summer Series, it, it was it wasn't a proper match in the sense that if you won or lost, you didn't particularly care. Whereas, as sort of the fans that we are, there's always that much more skin in the game. But the prices they charged for tickets were ludicrous. I spent $120 to watch a friendly. I'm going, why am I doing this? Ignoring the cost of going there, just to be able to say that you've watched your side play in the States, sort of that type of thing. So as far as clubs are concerned, it's a huge opportunity for additional revenue earning. So putting that in a framework of enhancing the visualization of the Saudi Pro League, playing against Real Madrid, Barcelona, Liverpool, Manchester United, Bayern, you choose, six to eight teams who would have formed the Super League. You've got the top four teams from the Saudi Pro League, and it's a tournament which takes place over 2 weeks, and you're guaranteed each 3 or 4 games each. You can see that being quite good from. That's Billy saying.
That was
Even he gets bored of me.
That was
droning on.
That was a deep sigh, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Well, tell Finley that Smudge is also annoyed this morning because of the wind. She hates the wind.
I know.
So and I'm getting blamed for it being windy outside. So. Oh, there you
go. So the amount of money likely to be on offer is going to be significant. We've seen, I think it's the Spanish Super Cup. Is now taking place in Saudi, and we know that Rubiales, his premises were raided, as was those of PK, with regards to the large commissions being paid in terms of negotiating such deals. It's going to happen because the clubs are desperate, and you might say, well, does it affect us as fans of Palace or Brighton, or if you're an Everton fan, or if you're a Villa fan, and so on? Well, it might not affect us now, but I can assure you that the people that own Manchester United and Liverpool, they do not want a 20-team Premier League. They want a 16-team Premier League, because that will allow them to play in bigger tournaments, which are pre-season and so on, which are taking place overseas. And it allows them to increase their revenues even more. They'll quite happily, drop 4 home games a season, because it will be against, again, no disrespect to us, because that Brighton and Palace probably won't be in the 16, and Bournemouth won't be in the 16, and Burnley won't be in the 16, and therefore they can't charge some of the ludicrous prices that they charge for sort of additional issues to do with those matches. And these matches, which will take place in Riyadh, or wherever it's going to be in Saudi, again, the ticket prices will be very high compared to what a regular Manchester United fan is paying for their season ticket at Old Trafford. So there's higher revenues coming in. There'll be huge amounts of prize money on offer. And it could even be that you'll arrange it in such a way that you get special sponsors on the back of the shirt, or you've got a special shirt for that tournament, which allows the clubs to make even more money. So I think it's an inevitability, and it's part of the desire of the owners of the bigger clubs. And this isn't disrespecting anybody who doesn't support one of those clubs, or is criticism of the person that does support one of those clubs. The owners do not care about football. They do care about making money. And this is too good a money-making opportunity to turn down. Could the regulator do anything about it? It's not an alternative competition. Provided there still is a Premier League and a Champions League, then it will be marketed as pre-season or post-season activities rather than central football.
Before I come back to that, Kieran, I think it's worth mentioning, as you've mentioned, Rubiales, he's now been arrested. We spoke last week at some length about his we assumed his house was being searched by the Spanish authorities, and he was away at the time. He's now come back and he's been arrested. So that's a story we'll be keeping an eye on. And it's arrested as part of an investigation into the potential corruption about matches being placed outside Spain. What about the inference? So you say this would be a post-season tournament or a pre-season tournament. I think Harry France is inferring, or in his question, he infers that would this be able to take place during the season? Would, for example, the top 6 clubs in Britain say, well, no, we're flying out. We haven't got a game for 2 weeks. We're flying out to Saudi to play 2 friendlies. It is a tournament as such, but it's just the way we see clubs going to Dubai during international breaks, for example. So would they be able to do it, do you think, in the season?
Yeah, without doubt, because it's not an area in which the Premier League or UEFA could have a ruling. They just say it's an opportunity for players to get some 90 minutes of activity into their legs. So the lawyers will easily find a way, and I don't think it's breaking any rules. The concern is, we have spoken at length on many occasions with regards to what we are seeing in the game. We've got to know Maheta at the PFA, and every time I have a chat with him, it's my members. Yes, that they are handsomely paid. Nobody's denying that, but don't reduce the quality of the product. You saw the Champions League final last year. It was a bit crap because the players are knackered.
Yeah. James Sternberg has our next question, Kieran. James says, we've seen that over the last few decades, the value of being promoted into the Premier League has increased significantly. But I was wondering how beneficial, how that's I tried to breathe and say the word beneficial at the same time there, Kieran, which turned out to be a mistake. I was wondering how beneficial getting promoted to the old Division 1 would have been financially for clubs, and whether the yo-yo-ness that exists today...
Well, no, what a word.
I did debate, Kieran, as to whether I should try and find another word for yo-yo-ness, but I'm happy with yo-yo-ness. Was it as prevalent then as it is now?
Right. This did cause me to have to address the Companies House archives. And if we go back to West Ham in 1991, when they were promoted from what we used to call the second division to the first division, and their revenue went up from £6.6 million to £7.7 million. So it went up by 1.1. I then give you Nottingham Forest, who were promoted to the Premier League in 2022, and their revenue didn't go up by £1.1 million. It went up by £125 million. So what we had in the old system, the old 92, was a scenario in which there was greater fluidity. And we didn't used to see the same element. It wasn't effectively, and the accusation that's made today is that we've actually got a 25 or 26 club Premier League, in the sense that Southampton, Leicester and Leeds are likely to take 2, if not 3 of the places, the clubs going up. We saw last season, Burnley and Sheffield United were both promoted, both were in receipt of parachute payments and so on. And therefore, the creation of clubs who are yo-yoing between the 2 divisions is something which has become more common. And that is the reason why. It's because the huge step-ups, and in my view, the worst decision that's ever been made in English football from a financial point of view was when the Premier League was created and it broke away from the EFL. It offered the clubs in the EFL 25% of the combined TV deal. And the clubs in the EFL effectively stuck up 2 fingers, said, F you, we think we can do better by ourselves. And they have spectacularly failed to do that. I mean, the Premier League is one of this country's, in my view, greatest exports, not just from a financial point of view, but in terms of, if you or I ever go overseas, the first thing that we asked is, what football team do you support? We love the Premier League and so on. 197 countries around the world watch it. It's a phenomenal achievement, and the people involved who have helped to drive that interest deserve an awful lot of credit. But it has had unintended consequences, as the Premier League itself is too often keen to mutter with regards to the proposals in relation to the independent regulator.
Yeah. You can't help thinking, though, Kieran, that even if the Football League had taken that 25% deal, that within 5 or 6 years, when the Premier League realised how much they were actually coughing up to the Football League, that deal would have been renegotiated, I would imagine.
Very possibly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
fair comment.
I don't think any of us at the time, Kieran, even Sky, I don't think anybody realised how the Premier League would take off and how it would become such a money-making machine. This is a really interesting question, Kieran. It comes from Joshua Selig, who's an old and loyal listener, old as in been listening for a long time. I have no indication at all as to Joshua's actual age. He could be 12. He might be very precocious. Who knows? But it's a very interesting question, Kieran. And Joshua Selig says, I was perusing the Supreme Court website recently, and luckily he's put in brackets, as you do, because again, that saves me doing it. But he says, I came across this case. Commissioners for His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, respondent, versus Professional Game Match Officials Limited, appellant. I was just wondering how referees are paid normally and how this judgment might affect things. Well, first of all, Kieran, do you know what this case was about? And secondly, as we've discussed before, when it came to researching our book, the area that was most difficult to get any information on was how referees, not only how much are they paid, but how they are paid and on what basis, and whether some referees are paid more than others. So I'd be interested in your insight in this, because we were just met with a complete blank wall trying to get this information out of the PGMOL.
Yes, I think this is an intriguing one. And as far as I'm aware, that we are still awaiting a final judgment with regards to it. The issue is whether or not a referee, now this tends to apply to referees at tier 3 and tier 4, most of all, whether those are employees of Professional Game Match Officials Limited, in which case there's national insurance to pay, there's PAYE to be deducted, or whether or not that they are self-employed and therefore they can, I used to referee, and you get paid your £5 or £6 at the end of a match by the club secretary. And that was the basis of it. Now, obviously, at tiers 3 and 4, it's slightly more sophisticated than that. But I think there is an issue. I would imagine that at the sort of the Michael Oliver level, as far as the Premier League is concerned, then the referees probably are deemed to be employees for the simple reason that it's their full-time occupation. But when you drop down to tier 3 or tier 4, we're talking, the fees involved are not considerable. The referees in the Premier League, I think there are 3 tiers of referees sort of at the elite end, and they are on a salary of between £70,000 to £140,000 a year, and they are paid around about £1,000 a match as an additional match fee. And of course, they can earn money on the after dinner circuit and bits and pieces and so on with regards to that. When you are doing a National League match, when you are doing a League 2 match and so on, the fees are going to be that much lower. And I did sort of read the cases to date, which initially I think the PGMOL were successful in the sense that they managed to persuade some of the courts, and we've gone through here the tier of courts which exist. Initially, they were able to say, well, people at that stage, it's a glorified hobby as far as the referees were concerned, and therefore they should be treated as self-employed, and there wouldn't be any national insurance issues, and there wouldn't be PAYE being deducted. And there was also an argument put forward, and I think this does have some validity, is that, okay, let's be honest, we all moan about referees. And if I look at my WhatsApp groups yesterday for Brighton versus Arsenal, 70 or 80% of it was never a penalty. Well, I thought it was a penalty. Yeah, people arguing, yeah, what I thought it was. And I was actually quite close to where it happened, but you know, and the level of abuse that you get as a referee, and again, as somebody that's refereed at lower levels, anyway, that was bad. I quit in the end. I just couldn't be asked. Why am I giving up my Sunday morning? And I was refereeing kids football. Kids football is far worse than adults football because of the parents who are on the sidelines who think that their child is going to turn into a gold mine in 15 years' time. Would it actually dissuade people going into refereeing with a possible eye? If you start young enough, could I make progress through the ranks, and could I actually have a professional career in the game? If you are deemed to be an employee at an early stage and you're having PAYE and national insurance deducted and so on, it means that your net would be pretty crap, and therefore it would actually dissuade people from entering the profession.
Yeah. I would imagine, Kieran, that current top flight referees are contractually discouraged, shall we say, from doing after dinner circuit work. It's for very many reasons. It's only after referees retire that they can get onto that lucrative circuit or sell their soul to Paddy Power, for example. It's interesting, Kieran, as well, though, because the HMRC had an issue with presenters in my industry when they said, why is it that some presenters who work solely for ITV or who work solely for BBC were still being paid normally through their own production companies but as self-employed? And that's still an ongoing issue. So it wouldn't be a surprise if they were looking for other areas in which they could square that circle, would it?
Well, that's right. And one of the reasons why we say at the end of the show, you might even want to see this presented by Parker from Thunderbirds and Miriam Margolyes, is that, could we be deemed to be employees of Producer Guy?
God, I hope not, really.
I don't know.
That really would that would be a sweary one, wouldn't it? It was Parker and Miriam Margolyes.
Yes, it would.
My God, I've never heard a woman swear so much as me. She's got the most eye-watering stories. I'm amazed. Wow, she's certainly lived a life, still living it by the sound of it.
Yes.
On a related note, not to what Miriam Margolyes gets up to in the back of cars, but referees. Luke Judson has this question. Luke Judson says, how much would it cost to bring in VAR or VAR light to the EFL, as has been discussed previously with the powers that be? And would there be any way for the FA or the EFL to help clubs afford this? In part, it's an interesting one, Kieran. It took the FA long enough to bring goal line technology in to the Championship. I believe it's just the Championship. And given, as we talk on a weekly basis about how much you could make by getting out of the Championship and getting into the Premier League, I'm amazed that they haven't introduced VAR at that level there, because mistakes at that level are potentially costing teams £100 million, aren't they?
It will certainly have been discussed at Championship level. That there's no doubt. As far as the Premier League is concerned, from my understanding, it's costing around about £3 million a year.
Per club, is that, or just in general?
No, that's collectively. So
okay.
So on an individual, because you got the setup costs, but then I think there's additional costs potentially. Ironically, going to PGMOL because you need people in the truck at Stockley Park. In the case of Scotland, it's £1.2 million a year, and again, that just applies to the Premiership. When it comes to the FA Cup, and I think this has caused, understandably, a bit of grumbling from clubs in the EFL, when they have been away at Premier League clubs who have already had that initial setup cost in terms of VAR, the Football Association deducts £9,000 from the EFL teams or the non-league teams' share of the gate receipts to say, well, that's the cost of VAR. But of course, if they've got a home match against a Premier League club, there is no VAR. So it does seem rather a strange one. I think the state of the finances of clubs in the EFL is so precarious. We are seeing huge losses being announced left, right, and centre. And because VAR is so contentious as well, and I'm one of the, I think the very few people that takes the view that it's far from imperfect, but it has reduced the number of errors. And to me, it's a bit like saying, if some people I know still object to wearing seatbelts, but it doesn't reduce the number of deaths from car injuries from car accidents to zero, but it has reduced them substantially. And if you take a look at VAR, it's not reduced the number of refereeing errors, and they are errors. Players cheat, referees make errors, and I think this is something which people never seem to get their heads around. It's not reduced it to zero, but certainly goal line technology, fantastic. Offside, yeah, you can argue that the offside rules are themselves need addressing, but the VAR tends to get it right, unless we had that that ludicrous situation in Spurs versus Liverpool where the communication was poor. But it's meant that there are fewer errors, but it will never reduce it to zero. Now, is that worth the payoff of not being able to celebrate a goal? That's a separate discussion. So we are talking millions. I don't think it would be worth it financially below the Championship, but in the Championship, as you rightly pointed out, if it's £100 million one way or the other, then it's surely worth considering.
With the classic VAR conversation in the pub before the Man City game yesterday, because this was after we had the inquest into me not getting into Bournemouth on Tuesday night and trying to pin down the blame. But we had a goal disallowed in that game, which without VAR would have been happily given and possibly should have been given. And that was the gist of the conversation. But then somebody said, if Bournemouth had scored that goal, would you have expected VAR to disallow it? You go, yeah, of course, it was offside. So, VAR only gets it wrong when like the penalty yesterday, which it's definitely a penalty. Eze was definitely fouled. We still would have definitely lost. So I think sometimes VAR factors that into the equation as well. Just going, well, it's only putting a sticking plaster on the problem, isn't it? Our penultimate question Kieran, is a simple one, but an interesting one. And it comes from Will Grieve. Will Grieve says, can you break down the finances behind how Inter Miami were able to sign Lionel Messi?
Yes, this is a fascinating one. There is a wage cap which exists as far as MLS is concerned, because the aim of MLS is for clubs to make a profit. And that is the aim of all US sports franchise owners. However, there is also a star clause whereby, with the approval of MLS, you are allowed to bring in some players. So Lionel Messi is on a base salary of $12 million with Inter Miami. He can have bonuses up to a further $8 million, which would take his total package to 20. That is more than the total salary paid by some of the clubs in MLS in terms of their own rights. And it's a terrible thing to say. You go, 20 million, it's okay. What a ludicrous thing for us to, because we're not even flinching at that amount of money, because we know that Cristiano Ronaldo is on 150 to 180 million, as is Neymar and so on, for playing in the Saudi Pro League. So why has Lionel Messi not gone down that route? Well, what he has, which I find intriguing and quite innovative, is that he has separate contracts with Apple and Adidas. Now, Apple and Apple TV in particular, they have the broadcasting contract for MLS. And he's on a revenue share in terms of the number of people who subscribe to watch and the number of people who are seeing him play. I think we're recording this on Sunday. I believe he made his return to Inter Miami yesterday following a hamstring injury and scored within 20 minutes. And I still maintain I've seen him play once, and it was like a different level of football to what I've ever seen. It's the same with Adidas. That Inter Miami shirt, rightly or wrongly, has become a bestseller, and it's a bestseller on the back of the involvement of Lionel Messi. So he's on a profit share for every shirt that's sold by Adidas, and that's estimated to bring in £50 to £60 million or $50 to $60 million a year. So that's sort of the breakdown. Can MLS afford it? Yes, because they are not directly paying for a lot of the costs. The people who are behind it into Miami, they A, get to see it, Lionel Messi, B, they get sold out stadiums every week, and C, they've managed to sign commercial deals which have brought in substantial amounts of money. So they feel that it's a worthwhile activity as well.
Kieran, you can have Lionel Messi. Based on recent evidence, including yesterday, I'm going for Kevin De Bruyne. If I could have one player, I'm bringing in Kevin De Bruyne. Possibly in a player swap with Will Hughes. Who knows? It's just one of those things when
you heard it here first.
You take your seat, the teams are announced, and you go, "This is not fair, is it? Something's got to be done."
I saw those goals.
Something's got to be done about this. That first one, were I not surrounded by people who wouldn't approve, was tempted to applaud that myself, Kieran. You reposted something this week, Kieran, from a respected journalist in a newspaper I don't respect, but he was suggesting that the idea of a luxury tax is something that is being discussed by the Premier League as a possible replacement for FFP. Do you think there's anything in that, Kieran?
Yeah, I think we'll take a look at this perhaps in depth, because what we're going to look at perhaps on Thursday, we will look at the luxury tax. We're going to look at anchoring as well, which is another option which is being discussed. I personally think that a luxury tax can work, but it all comes down to the detail. It's all a case of at what rate do you set the tax? If you set it at 5% or 10%, then it just becomes a sovereign wealth fund plaything. What I would do is I would set it at 400%, and I've done the sums. And 75% of the money goes to the other 19 teams in the Premier League, and 25% of the money goes to the clubs in the EFL. And you do the sums, and if you want to go and buy football, yes, you can still do it, but it's going to cost you it'll be such a deterrent at that level that I think even the ridiculously rich owners would go, "Blimey, O'Reilly, this is bonkers."
Yeah, well, I look forward to that discussion, Kieran. So much so, I'm not even going to ask you what anchoring is now. I'm going to wait until Thursday, and I'm going to spend the next few days annoying Ali. I said, Kieran said anchoring. I wonder, what do you think anchoring means? And then she'll do her teenagers. And our final question, Kieran, I find a really intriguing one, because I didn't think such a thing existed anymore, but clearly it does. It comes from Stephen Johnston. And Stephen says, last year Rangers announced a testimonial with Newcastle for legendary goalkeeper Alan McGregor. The price was set at £25, and this was determined by something called a testimonial committee. The next friendly was set at £15, which seems like a big jump. Can you shed any light on what a testimonial committee is and why the price would be far greater? Now, I just assumed, Kieran, that football at the top level had done away with the need for testimonials, because, of course, in the old days when we first started watching, it was a retiring players only nest egg, essentially, which is why people tended to turn out for them. But I didn't realise it was still a thing. So I'm intrigued by the answer to this question.
They're certainly not as common as before, and I think part of the reason for that is that I believe the tax rules may no longer be as beneficial as they have been historically, but somebody might be able to correct me on that. With regards to the role of a testimonial committee, it tends to be fans who are operating in businesses who support the club, who've got an affection for player X or player Y. And what they will do is that they will put together, you will have a testimonial year. There will be half a dozen events. There might be a golf day. There'll be a big meal day where you've got after dinner speakers, and the player in question will say a few things. Testimonial match, a few other fundraising activities, and all of that goes into a central bank account, which has been used historically in respect of the players. But what we then started to see was some players saying, "Look, I've been at the Premier League level. I've been financially generously rewarded throughout my career. And what I want to do is actually raise money for a local cause." I think Niall Quinn was one of the first people to do that, and he was held in high regard as a result of that. So the committee is in charge of organising the events. Is doing the stuff that the player themselves won't necessarily have a lot of experience of, or particularly wants to do. And let's be honest, we're exactly the same when it comes to doing live shows. We're quite happy to turn up and act like teenagers, but we don't particularly want to do any of the background work. So you can understand that from the player's point of view, and that's why we've got our very good friends Princess Julian and so to do that for us. As far as the prices being charged, it's what you think the market will bear. So Rangers fans and Newcastle fans will march hundreds of miles for any opportunity to see people in their shirts, and therefore you can charge them more. It's as simple as that. Whereas if you have been at Walsall for 10 years or 12 years, it's not quite the same. And you might be able to get a match against the Blues or Villa or Wolves as your testimonial match, and you might. But even so, that the fans of that other club are going, well, why? I'm not prepared to pay 25 quid, but I might be willing to pay 15. So it's simply a market forces issue. There's no hard and fast rule. And that's why you will see clubs who do have testimonial committees. They are desperate to get the likes of a club of the stature of Rangers or Newcastle or Celtic or Manchester United or Liverpool, because the fans will turn up regardless of the opposition and regardless of the event.
I've said this before on the pod, Kieran, that it is a testament to how wonderful Julian Speroni is as a human being, that when it came to his testimonial, the money from which he announced would be donated to various good local causes, again, because he's Steve Parish offered him Barcelona or Real Madrid and had already put these things in place. He went, no, I want Dundee. Because that's the team that brought me over from Argentina. So I think it's still an 18,000 crowd in the end, but it would have been a sellout otherwise. And I've also said this before, it would have been a 19,000 crowd, except one of the trains carrying Dundee fans was turned back at Newcastle while they arrested several of the Dundee fans on it. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you, and it will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. Our end of season quiz is coming up. It can't come up quickly enough, Kieran. You can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question that you'd like answered on the show, you can email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And you can go to the same website if you'd like to buy our book. Now, before I hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell, I'd like to warn you all, well in advance, that we are going to shift the questions pod from Monday to Tuesday. Now, apologies if this messes with your weekly routine. We know how many of you like to listen to this in the gym. We can tell by the gym-honed bodies of all of you that turned up to our live shows. But it just turns out that recording and editing on Sundays is proving much trickier than it was when we started out. We'll be making that switch in the first week in May, just to give you a few weeks' notice. Apologies, as I say, if it does mess with your weekly routine and the dog has to wait a day longer for his I always like it when people say you wore my dog out because you did an extra long pod. Like, we take no responsibility for how people listen to this pod, Kieran. So we'll be back. When we'll be back? We'll be back on this Thursday. Well, yes, of course. We've already mentioned the subject. We're going to be talking about anchoring. So in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Thank you very much. And I must take some responsibility for this switch. I'm under pressure at home. I don't see enough of my granddaughters, and I want to spend more family time with them. So if it's messed around with your Monday morning body honing activities, blame me for this, because I'm trying to get a bit of Sunday back, and it does take a lot of time at company's house to prepare the answers, whilst we joke about it. There's a variety of ways of supporting the show, and thank you for everybody that does interact for us. We genuinely appreciate the fact that you seem to want to keep us on our toes, and that's only right and proper. There's another way that you can support the show, and that's to give us a review. Doesn't matter what you say. So for those nostalgia freakies who want the real voices, you could have it presented by Parker and Lady Penelope.
Ooh.
And I think that would be an absolutely fascinating show and very reverential, while still being for 8 or 9 year boys amongst us. She sounds very posh, doesn't she?
If you had Lady Penelope and Miriam Margolyes, just to see the shocked look on Lady Penelope's face. That cigarette holder would be going up and down like a... Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.